Why is it that two places, separated by a line on a map, can produce lives that feel as though they belong to entirely different centuries? Why does a child born in South Korea have access to education, healthcare, technology, and opportunity, while a child born the same day in North Korea is born into scarcity, fear, and control, despite sharing the same history, culture, ethnicity, and geography? This question is not academic. It is personal. It shapes destinies before people can even choose for themselves. Why nations fail begins with this uncomfortable truth. Poverty is not an accident, and wealth is not destiny. Nations are not poor because their people are lazy, unintelligent, or unlucky. Nor are nations rich because they are morally superior or divinely favored. The real explanation is far more unsettling and empowering. Nations succeed or fail because of the institutions they build and tolerate. If you love powerful, insightful, and life-changing books, then you've found the right channel. Every week, we break down the ideas that transform mindsets, elevate success, and shift lives. So don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you'll want to catch every book we review. Let's continue. At first, many people resist this idea. It feels easier to blame geography. After all, tropical countries struggle more with disease, agriculture, and climate, while temperate zones historically thrived. But geography alone collapses as an explanation when we look closer. Singapore sits almost directly on the equator, yet it is one of the wealthiest nations on Earth. Meanwhile, Haiti and the Dominican Republic share the same island, climate, and natural resources. Yet Haiti is dramatically poorer. If geography were destiny, these outcomes would be impossible. Culture is often blamed next. People argue that some cultures value hard work, thrift, and education more than others. But this explanation fails too. North and South Korea once shared the same culture. East and West Germany spoke the same language and held the same traditions. What changed was not culture, but power. As philosopher John Locke warned centuries ago, wherever law ends, tyranny begins. When power concentrates without accountability, progress suffocates. The authors introduced the idea that institutions, human-made rules shaping incentives, determine whether societies thrive or decay. These institutions fall broadly into two categories: inclusive and extractive. Inclusive institutions allow people to participate in economic and political life, protect property rights, reward innovation, and encourage effort. Extractive institutions, by contrast, concentrate power in the hands of a few who design systems to siphon wealth from the many. This distinction explains why development is not simply about aid, technology, or resources. You can pour money into a country with extractive institutions, but the benefits will be captured by elites. You can introduce technology, but innovation will be stifled if it threatens those in power. Progress requires not just tools, but freedom backed by rules. Consider the example of colonialism, which still echoes in modern inequality. When European powers colonized large parts of the world, they did not create institutions to benefit local populations. They created extractive systems designed to move wealth outward. In places like the United States, Canada, and Australia, where settlers planned to live permanently, institutions protecting property rights, courts, and political participation emerged. In much of Africa and Latin America, where colonizers sought quick extraction, institutions of coercion replaced inclusion. This is why historical starting points matter, but they do not doom nations forever. South Korea was poorer than Ghana in the 1950s. Today, the difference is staggering. South Korea eventually built institutions that rewarded education, entrepreneurship, and industrial growth. Ghana struggled with cycles of military coups, corruption, and centralized control. The divergence was not about intelligence or effort. It was about who held power and how it was constrained. In the modern world, we see this lesson repeat itself. Countries rich in oil and minerals often suffer from what economists call the resource curse. Venezuela, once one of Latin America's wealthiest nations, collapsed economically not because it lacked oil, but because power became centralized and institutions were hollowed out. When leaders control both the state and the economy, incentives shift from productivity to loyalty. Innovation dies because it threatens the ruling elite. The United States offers a contrasting example, not perfect, but instructive. Its long-term prosperity has rested on relatively inclusive political institutions, separation of powers, rule of law, and protection of private enterprise. Even when inequality rises, the system still allows pressure, reform, and correction. That flexibility is critical. As James Madison once wrote, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." Institutions exist because humans are flawed and must be constrained. What makes this argument powerful is that it reframes responsibility. Nations are not trapped by fate. They are shaped by choices, often made by elites, but eventually challenged by people. Inclusive institutions tend to emerge through struggle, not generosity. The expansion of voting rights, labor protections, civil rights, and economic access rarely happened peacefully or voluntarily. They were demanded. This brings us to a crucial insight. Economic institutions cannot be inclusive without inclusive political institutions. If political power is concentrated, economic opportunity will follow it. Those in control will block competition, suppress dissent, and rewrite rules to stay on top. This is why authoritarian regimes often experience short bursts of growth followed by stagnation or collapse. Growth without inclusion is fragile. China today illustrates this tension. Its rapid economic growth lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty, but political power remains tightly controlled. Innovation thrives in some areas, but censorship, surveillance, and state dominance limit long-term creativity. The question is not whether China can grow, but whether it can sustain growth without broader political inclusion. History suggests the answer is uncertain. Philosophically, this aligns with Aristotle's idea that a society exists not merely to live, but to live well. Wealth alone is insufficient if freedom, dignity, and participation are denied. Nations fail not only economically, but morally, when systems treat people as tools rather than citizens. At the individual level, this lesson resonates deeply. Just as nations thrive when incentives reward effort and innovation, people flourish when environments allow growth. Toxic systems, whether countries, companies, or families, produce stagnation. Empowering systems create momentum. The macro mirrors the micro. As part 1 closes, a central truth emerges. The fate of nations is written not in their soil, culture, or history, but in their institutions. And institutions are not immutable. They can be reformed, challenged, and rebuilt. The question is never, why are they poor? But who benefits from the system staying this way? If part 1 revealed why nations fail, this next movement explains how failure becomes locked in, and why even well-intentioned reforms collapse when power remains concentrated. It is here that the book delivers its most uncomfortable truth. Poverty is not accidental, and prosperity is not purely cultural or geographical. Both are political outcomes. The authors show that once extractive institutions take hold, they don't merely slow progress, they actively defend themselves. Those who benefit from extraction fight change because reform threatens their privileges. This creates what Acemoglu and Robinson call a vicious cycle, where power reinforces bad institutions and bad institutions reinforce power. At first, this cycle is invisible. Leaders speak the language of reform while quietly maintaining control. They build roads, hold elections, announce anti-corruption drives, but the core structure remains untouched. Courts still serve elites. Media still bows to power. Wealth still flows upward. Over time, citizens begin to feel something deeper than poverty, hopelessness. A philosopher once warned, "The most dangerous form of oppression is when people no longer imagine freedom." That is the psychological victory of extractive systems. Modern examples make this clear. Consider Venezuela. Once one of Latin America's richest countries due to oil, It collapsed not because oil disappeared, but because power centralized. When political leaders dismantled independent institutions and used oil wealth to entrench loyalty instead of accountability, productivity died. Businesses fled. Innovation froze. The nation entered a downward spiral that slogans could not reverse. This same pattern echoes elsewhere. In parts of Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, and even within powerful democracies, when political access becomes restricted to insiders, growth slows. Even if the country appears stable on the surface, extractive systems can survive for decades, sometimes centuries, but they rot from within. The book then introduces a critical distinction: political power versus economic power. Economic power creates wealth, but political power decides who controls it. If political power is concentrated, economic gains will be seized rather than shared. This is why some countries experience growth without development. GDP rises, but ordinary people feel poorer. The numbers lie because institutions don't serve the many. This explains why foreign aid, natural resources, or technological access alone cannot fix failing nations. Without inclusive political institutions, new wealth becomes a new prize for elites. Aid strengthens autocrats. Oil strengthens dictators. Technology strengthens surveillance instead of freedom. A modern American parallel appears in discussions around corporate monopolies and political lobbying. When corporations gain disproportionate influence over laws, regulations begin to favor consolidation instead of competition. Innovation suffers. Small businesses die. The economy grows less dynamic. While not identical to authoritarian extraction, the logic rhymes. When access is restricted, stagnation follows. The authors argue that inclusive institutions emerge not from kindness, but from conflict and constraint. Elites never voluntarily surrender power. They are forced to share it through pressure, resistance, and negotiation. This is where history becomes decisive. England's Glorious Revolution in 1688 is a turning point. When Parliament successfully constrained the monarchy, power shifted. Property rights became secure. Entrepreneurs invested without fear of confiscation. Innovation flourished. This was not inevitable, it was contested, but it shows that progress requires limits on authority. The lesson flows forward. Freedom is institutionalized mistrust. Strong societies don't rely on virtuous leaders. They rely on systems that prevent abuse. As James Madison famously wrote, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." Inclusive institutions assume humans are flawed and design accordingly. This insight dismantles the myth of the strongman savior. History repeatedly shows that centralized control might deliver short-term order, but long-term decline follows. When one voice dominates, errors multiply unchecked. When dissent is punished, truth disappears. Modern technology intensifies this danger. Surveillance tools, digital currencies, and AI governance can either empower citizens or entrench control. Without inclusive institutions, technology accelerates extraction instead of liberation. The future doesn't belong to the most advanced nations, but to those with the most accountable systems. Another crucial idea emerges: creative destruction. Inclusive institutions allow old industries to die so new ones can be born. Extractive systems resist this because innovation threatens entrenched interests. This is why some countries protect failing monopolies while punishing startups. Progress stalls because power fears replacement. Look at how tech innovation thrives in open systems. In the United States, despite imperfections, entrepreneurs can disrupt giants. In contrast, in closed systems, innovation is dangerous. Success attracts confiscation. Failure attracts punishment. So people stop trying. Here, the authors introduce a subtle but profound insight. Talent is universal. Opportunity is not. There are brilliant minds in slums, villages, and failed states. But without institutions that reward effort and protect gains, brilliance remains buried. A modern global example appears in immigration patterns. When talented individuals flee unstable or extractive nations, they don't suddenly become smarter abroad. They become freer. Institutions unlock what oppression suppressed. The flow of the lesson is relentless. Nations fail when power remains unchecked, when elites fear change more than stagnation, and when citizens are excluded from decision-making. And nations succeed when rules apply equally, when failure is allowed, and when power is dispersed. Yet the authors caution against complacency. Inclusive institutions are fragile. They can decay. Democracies can slide. Vigilance is the price of prosperity. This brings the lesson closer to the individual reader. Societies are not abstract. They are built by choices, what we tolerate, what we challenge, what we normalize. As the philosopher Hannah Arendt observed, the most radical revolutionary will become a conservative the day after the revolution. Power always seeks to protect itself. Thus, the struggle for inclusion is never finished. As we progress in understanding why nations fail or thrive, one lesson becomes unmistakably clear. Institutions are the foundation upon which prosperity is built, and the type of institutions a society embraces determines its trajectory. Inclusive institutions, those that empower citizens, protect property rights, and encourage innovation, create environments where people are incentivized to invest, take risks, and contribute to collective wealth. Conversely, extractive institutions, those that concentrate power in the hands of a few, suppress competition, and exploit the masses, cripple a nation's potential. The story of North and South Korea exemplifies this in recent history. Post-World War II, the peninsula was divided, yet two societies with almost identical cultural backgrounds diverged dramatically due to the institutions imposed upon them. South Korea embraced inclusive, democratic, and market-oriented policies, fostering technological innovation and rapid economic growth. Meanwhile, North Korea's extractive regime entrenched a centralized authoritarian system, resulting in economic stagnation, famine, and widespread poverty. The lesson resonates globally. A nation's policies and institutions dictate whether its people thrive or languish, regardless of geography or resources. This institutional argument is echoed across the Americas as well. Consider the contrast between the United States and Haiti. Both countries gained independence from colonial powers, yet their trajectories were starkly different. The U.S. benefited from inclusive institutions, constitutional checks and balances, property rights, and a legal framework that encouraged commerce and innovation. Haiti, however, suffered under extractive colonial legacies and subsequent political instability that curtailed economic development and perpetuated inequality. Here, Acemoglu and Robinson emphasize that history matters. History is not destiny, but it creates constraints and incentives. The philosophical resonance is clear. Aristotle once said, "The rule of law is better than the rule of any individual." A society that empowers its institutions over concentrated authority allows citizens to flourish, whereas one dominated by extractive elites constrains progress. Yet, institutions do not exist in isolation. Political centralization and inclusive politics are necessary complements. Without a centralized authority to enforce laws and prevent powerful elites from seizing resources arbitrarily, even the most inclusive policies can fail. Medieval England illustrates this principle. After the Norman conquest, the centralization of authority under the monarchy allowed for the creation of inclusive institutions, such as property rights protections and a legal system that curbed arbitrary seizures of wealth. This centralization enabled economic experimentation, trade growth, and eventually the Industrial Revolution. Modern parallels exist in nations like Singapore, where a highly centralized government, combined with rule of law and meritocratic institutions, created a thriving, globally competitive economy. The lesson here is systematic. Centralized political authority is a prerequisite for sustaining inclusivity and prosperity. Without it, power vacuums are filled by extractive actors who undermine development. As we look further, Acemoglu and Robinson reveal a cyclical danger, the iron law of oligarchy, and extractive feedback loops. Extractive elites often exploit political power to maintain economic dominance, perpetuating cycles of poverty and underdevelopment. This concept can be observed in contemporary African nations where corruption entrenches wealth among political elites while large portions of the population remain impoverished. Nigeria, rich in oil but plagued by extractive institutions, demonstrates how resource wealth can paradoxically fuel inequality rather than prosperity, a phenomenon known as the resource curse. On the other hand, Botswana, also resource-rich, avoided the resource curse by maintaining transparent institutions, enforcing property rights, and encouraging citizen participation. The contrast underscores the principle that resources alone do not guarantee development. It is the institutions that transform resources into lasting wealth. The book also emphasizes the dangers of critical junctures, moments in history that present both risk and opportunity. Societies can leverage these moments to create inclusive institutions or regress into extractive ones. The end of colonial rule in much of Asia and Africa was such a juncture. Countries that established inclusive constitutions, invested in education, and implemented broad-based economic policies, e.g., Malaysia, were able to embark on sustained growth. Others that allowed extractive elites to dominate post-independence, e.g., Zimbabwe under Mugabe, experienced economic collapse and political instability. The philosophical thread running through these lessons is profound. We shape our institutions, and thereafter they shape us. Recognizing historical contingencies and acting decisively at these junctures can redirect a nation's future toward prosperity. Innovation, too, is inseparable from inclusivity. Extractive institutions suppress creativity by punishing dissent and rewarding conformity. Inclusive systems, however, provide security and incentives for experimentation, fueling technological progress and entrepreneurial success. The story of Silicon Valley demonstrates this principle. A combination of property rights protection, venture capital infrastructure, and a culture of experimentation created an ecosystem that attracts global talent and fosters exponential innovation. Contrast this with countries where authoritarian control stifles startups and innovation, like Venezuela, where nationalizations and restrictive policies have curtailed private enterprise. Innovation is both a product and a driver of inclusive institutions, reinforcing the feedback loop of prosperity. Moreover, Why Nations Fail demonstrates that change is possible even after prolonged extractive rule, but it requires leadership, coalition building, and citizen engagement. South Africa's transition from apartheid to democracy illustrates how inclusive political institutions can be established after decades of extractive domination. Nelson Mandela's leadership, coupled with strong civil society movements, allowed for the creation of new political and economic frameworks that gradually increased opportunity for millions of previously marginalized citizens. The lesson extends globally. Change is difficult, but not impossible, and understanding the dynamics of institutional incentives allows reformers to navigate the treacherous path toward inclusivity. Finally, Acemoglu and Robinson warn against deterministic views. Culture, geography, and natural resources do not inherently dictate a nation's destiny. Japan's post-war recovery demonstrates this vividly. Despite the destruction of World War II, inclusive reforms imposed under U.S. guidance, land redistribution, education reform, and industrial policy, enabled Japan to become an economic powerhouse. Similarly, Germany rebuilt its institutions and infrastructure to become one of the most prosperous nations in Europe. These cases reinforce the overarching lesson. Human decisions and institutional frameworks, more than circumstance, shape economic outcomes. Through careful analysis of global history and current events, Why Nations Fail makes an unassailable argument. Inclusive political and economic institutions empower people, create incentives for innovation, and enable sustained prosperity. Extractive institutions concentrate power, perpetuate poverty, and suppress human potential. The lessons cascade. Inclusive institutions require centralized authority, which fosters innovation, which then reinforces inclusivity. Critical junctures determine whether nations consolidate inclusive systems or fall into extractive traps, and leadership, coalition building, and citizen engagement can redirect a nation's trajectory even after centuries of oppression. As the authors remind us, the path to prosperity is not automatic. It is deliberately built, nurtured, and protected. Building upon the foundations of inclusive institutions, Acemoglu and Robinson emphasize that sustainable development is not merely about economic policy, but also about the distribution of political power. Societies thrive when citizens have a genuine voice in decision-making processes and when elites cannot manipulate institutions to extract wealth unchallenged. This lesson resonates today in the global fight against oligarchic control. For instance, in the United States, the democratic system, with its checks and balances, an independent judiciary, and civil liberties, has allowed entrepreneurs, innovators, and small businesses to flourish, even when facing opposition from entrenched elites. Contrast this with countries like Russia, where political power is concentrated and opposition is suppressed. Despite vast natural and human resources, the extractive institutions limit genuine competition, resulting in innovation stagnation and economic inequality. Acemoglu and Robinson introduced the concept of creative destruction, a term borrowed from Schumpeter, which describes the continuous cycle of innovation replacing outdated industries. Inclusive institutions create the environment for creative destruction by rewarding risk-taking and protecting property rights. Without this, nations become mired in economic inertia. A contemporary example is South Korea's evolution from a post-war agrarian economy to a technological powerhouse. By establishing inclusive institutions, promoting education, and investing in infrastructure, South Korea nurtured innovators like Samsung and Hyundai, turning the country into a global economic leader. Conversely, North Korea, with extractive institutions and a suppressive political system, has stagnated economically, demonstrating how institutional frameworks determine a nation's ability to adapt and thrive. Another crucial lesson is the danger of extractive feedback loops, where political and economic elites continuously reinforce each other's power to the detriment of the broader population. Latin America offers several illustrative examples. Venezuela, despite possessing the world's largest proven oil reserves, illustrates the catastrophic effect of extractive institutions. Political elites expropriated private enterprises, mismanaged resource wealth, and suppressed opposition, resulting in hyperinflation, food scarcity, and mass immigration. Chile, by contrast, implemented inclusive economic and political reforms in the late 20th century, combining social policies with market incentives, resulting in sustained economic growth and a rising middle class. The lesson: institutions are self-reinforcing, and once extractive institutions dominate, reversing them requires deliberate and often courageous interventions. The authors also explore the importance of critical junctures in shaping institutional paths. These junctures are moments of crisis or opportunity that allow societies to either reinforce extractive systems or establish inclusive ones. The European colonization of the Americas provides a striking example. In the British colonies, the relative scarcity of labor and the necessity of cooperation with local populations encouraged the development of inclusive political and economic structures, eventually leading to democratic governance. In contrast, Spanish and Portuguese colonies often relied on extractive institutions, exploiting indigenous populations for resource extraction, which created long-lasting inequality and political instability. This demonstrates a vital lesson. Historical contingencies interact with institutional choices to set nations on divergent paths, a principle still evident in contemporary post-colonial societies across Africa and South Asia. Acemoglu and Robinson argue that inclusive economic institutions must be accompanied by inclusive political institutions. Economic inclusivity without political inclusivity is unstable, as elites will eventually find ways to capture wealth and power. This dynamic is visible in contemporary China. While economic liberalization has lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty, political power remains centralized and unaccountable, creating potential vulnerabilities for future innovation and equitable development. Similarly, in the United States, political institutions that allow for transparency, accountability, and citizen participation ensure that economic progress benefits a wider segment of society. As the authors note, institutions are the fundamental cause of long-run growth. Global crises, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, highlight these lessons in real time. Countries with inclusive institutions, New Zealand, South Korea, Germany, were able to deploy rapid, transparent, and coordinated responses, saving lives while sustaining economic stability. Countries with extractive institutions, such as Brazil or Venezuela, struggled due to mismanagement, corruption, and lack of accountability, underscoring the connection between governance structures and national resilience. The lesson here is timeless. Institutions not only shape prosperity in normal times, but determine a nation's capacity to navigate shocks and crises effectively. Education, too, emerges as a key pillar of inclusive institutions. Societies that invest in broad-based education empower citizens to participate fully in economic and political life, creating virtuous cycles of innovation, accountability, and growth. Finland, with a highly inclusive and egalitarian education system, exemplifies this principle. By contrast, nations where access to education is restricted by political or economic elites perpetuate inequality and limit innovation. The global lesson is clear. Investing in human capital strengthens institutions and amplifies the benefits of inclusive governance. Perhaps the most philosophical lesson from Why Nations Fail is the power of human agency within structural constraints. While history and geography shape possibilities, man is the maker of his own institutions. This resonates with examples from civil society movements worldwide. The Arab Spring demonstrated how citizens, even under repressive regimes, can demand and fight for institutional change, though the outcomes remain contingent on subsequent institutional reforms. In the United States, movements for civil rights and labor rights similarly reshaped institutions to expand inclusivity and opportunity, proving that concerted action can overcome extractive constraints. Part 5 begins by emphasizing the interdependence of institutions, culture, and leadership. Acemoglu and Robinson assert that while geography and resources matter, the institutions a society builds ultimately determine prosperity. This principle is evident when comparing two resource-rich countries, Norway and the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. Norway transformed oil wealth into a sovereign wealth fund, supported by transparent governance, rule of law, and strong democratic institutions. In contrast, the DRC, despite abundant mineral wealth, remains mired in poverty due to extractive institutions, corruption, and political instability. The lesson is profound. Wealth is not a guarantee of prosperity. The design and enforcement of institutions decide whether resources benefit the population or a narrow elite. An equally critical insight is the danger of institutional drift. Nations can slip from inclusivity toward extraction when leaders consolidate power, weaken checks, or capture resources for personal gain. The United States provides a contemporary illustration of this tension. Debates over campaign finance, gerrymandering, and lobbying reveal how political and economic elites can influence institutions, potentially undermining inclusive frameworks. Globally, countries like Turkey and Hungary demonstrate how democratic backsliding can erode previously inclusive institutions, impacting long-term growth and social cohesion. Acemoglu and Robinson warn that vigilance and citizen engagement are essential to preserve inclusive systems, echoing Aristotle's assertion, "The law is reason, free from passion." Laws and institutions must remain impartial to ensure stability, fairness, and sustained development. The book also highlights the role of technology and innovation in shaping institutional outcomes. Inclusive institutions encourage experimentation, creativity, and entrepreneurship, which propel nations into competitive positions in the global economy. Silicon Valley exemplifies this principle. An ecosystem of property rights, access to capital, regulatory clarity, and openness to risk has produced transformative innovations that benefit global society. Conversely, nations with extractive institutions, such as Zimbabwe during Robert Mugabe's tenure, witnessed talented professionals fleeing, stifling innovation, and causing a brain drain that continues to hinder economic development. The lesson is that human capital and creativity thrive only when institutional frameworks empower rather than constrain them. A further lesson centers on the cyclical relationship between economic and political institutions. Extractive economic systems produce concentrated wealth, which feeds back into political domination, creating a self-reinforcing trap. Modern examples include parts of Latin America, where entrenched elites influence policymaking to preserve advantages. In contrast, South Korea and Taiwan successfully broke such cycles by implementing reforms that distributed wealth more equitably and created political competition, enabling broad-based development. The takeaway is clear. Breaking the cycle of extraction requires deliberate institutional reform, often catalyzed by crisis or visionary leadership. Acemoglu and Robinson also explore the moral dimension of institutions, arguing that prosperity is not merely technical but ethical. Inclusive institutions create social contracts that reward fairness, accountability, and collective responsibility. Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, illustrate how social trust, equitable taxation, and welfare systems reinforce institutional legitimacy, which in turn sustains innovation, growth, and stability. The lesson is universally applicable. A society's ethical foundation, reflected in its institutions, directly impacts economic and social outcomes. The book emphasizes that critical junctures are opportunities for systemic change, and history is full of examples where nations seized or squandered these moments. Post-World War II, Japan underwent institutional reform under U.S. guidance, fostering inclusive political structures, land reforms, and industrial policy that enabled rapid modernization. Germany, similarly, rebuilt inclusive institutions, creating a social market economy that combined efficiency with fairness. In contrast, post-colonial Congo and Haiti struggled to establish inclusive governance, illustrating how missed junctures can have long-lasting consequences. The lesson resonates with policymakers and citizens alike. Institutional choices during moments of crisis define the trajectory of nations for generations. Acemoglu and Robinson consistently argue that power without accountability is destructive. Concentrated authority leads to extraction, inequality, and instability. This insight is particularly relevant in the modern era, as the world witnesses rising authoritarian tendencies, political polarization, and corporate influence over governance. In the United States, the civil rights movement, labor reforms, and voting rights legislation serve as reminders that accountability mechanisms, checks and balances, judicial review, and citizen oversight are vital to maintaining inclusivity. Globally, movements in Hong Kong, Tunisia, and Myanmar illustrate both the risks of concentrated power and the power of collective citizen action in demanding institutional reform. Another critical lesson is the interplay of leadership and institutions. Charismatic or ruthless leaders can temporarily shape outcomes, but without supportive institutions, gains are fragile. Zimbabwe under Mugabe demonstrates how a powerful leader, unchecked by institutions, can reverse decades of potential progress. By contrast, the post-apartheid transition in South Africa shows how institutions, even amid imperfect leadership, can provide a framework for stability and incremental improvement. Acemoglu and Robinson underscore the point. Leadership matters, but enduring prosperity depends on institutional design that outlasts individuals. Finally, the book's overarching lesson is agency combined with systemic understanding creates transformative potential. Citizens, policymakers, and leaders must recognize that while geography, culture, and history constrain possibilities, they do not determine destiny. The authors conclude with the timeless reminder: man is the maker of his own institutions. Globally, we see evidence in countries like Estonia, which leveraged inclusive policies, digital infrastructure, and education reforms to emerge from post-Soviet stagnation into a thriving, innovative society. In the American context, initiatives fostering entrepreneurship, social mobility, and equitable education highlight how institutional choices can shape prosperity for millions. In sum, Why Nations Fail provides a blueprint for understanding the mechanics of prosperity and poverty. Its lessons are both cautionary and motivational. Inclusive institutions create opportunity, extractive institutions foster stagnation, and moments of crisis are gateways to either progress or decline. From the historical struggles of colonial empires to contemporary political challenges across the globe, the evidence is clear. Nations rise and fall based on the institutions they build, protect, and reform, and citizens have both the power and responsibility to shape those institutions. By internalizing these lessons, individuals, policymakers, and societies can foster resilient, innovative, and equitable communities, turning potential into real, sustainable prosperity. If this message resonated with you, subscribe and join us for more wisdom that fuels growth.